For Aadhaar, there are multiple ESPs that are there. So performances of these ESPs, it was not in our hands. So that was the constraint that we had. To move design around that constraint, what we did was we developed a cool feature which is auto switching of ESPs. In this, we actively monitor how the ESPs are performing. A particular interval of time, we adjust their priorities. So this way, when the signer is trying to sign, they land on the ESP which has the highest success rate. So they'll not have to do that journey again.
Working on the architectural revamp of our entire document execution application. One major constraint that we were facing was backward compatibility. While we were creating the new architecture, we had to ensure that all the processes that were happening in the older application remained valid, and so that we could also trigger documents in the same manner that we were doing previously.
One of the constraints that we had a lot of fun designing around was our user access management portal. So you might start with one premise and then you fine tune it depending on the architecture that you want to support. That was very fun because you have an idea, but now you have to fit it like a puzzle piece depending on the technical architecture that you are building towards.
We are trying to solve for how to make companies compliant to DPDP. So a lot of constraints right from the requirement, where we had to analyze the law and to build around its requirements, but also to make sure the business were able to conduct in a smoother way.
Originally, when we started providing e-signs along with stamping, a constraint that you cannot just e-stamp a document, you also need to e-sign it. And we thought this constraint would enforce this rule that we have added to our system, but people still manage to circumvent it by adding stamps to a document, adding a signer, and then after sending it out, they used to send it out to themselves and then manually complete the document. So users never do what we intend them to do.
One assumption that broke after seeing real user behavior was you usually assume that when you're shipping a feature, it's going to be used in this dimension, a specific lane. And at max, you think that they might break it by, stress testing the system. Sometimes there is a Z axis that pulls out, which is them finding a different way to implement the same feature. So an example can be that we have a feature called smart extraction, which is built on OCR. And in our head, there was a very specific use case for it that it could solve. But after seeing some ways that the clients were using it, it was a very interesting assumption that broke for us.
There are some things that we feel are very obvious, but then when it goes to the user, we realize that those things might not be as obvious as it seems to us. So for that case, with our testing team, over time they develop a context of the product, of things that are happening, and then they are directly able to gauge what an element means. But when we come to a user which is completely new, which happens when organizations are doing sandbox testing with us, that is when we realize that not all flows are that intuitive to those new users. So we had to take that feedback very quickly, and then we had to make things even more simple.
That would be WhatsApp pings. All our competitors sends their document on either via email or SMS for e-signing. And we figured out with email and SMS, the main problem is that the inbox is always so full and the open rates are so bad. So we decided to do this simple implementation where all your journeys get done through WhatsApp.
A newly revamped product that we have released, within it the ability to send multiple documents in a single workflow, such that a sender can add newer documents up to 15, and signers receive a single email with which they can use to e-sign all the documents in a single unified journey.
Most memorable one was shipping a word add-in. The entire journey was very different from just shipping a normal feature because you were working in the Word ecosystem. And we got to learn so much about how Microsoft Word is the gold standard for legal teams and why it's so important to sit and nest inside that ecosystem and build a feature there.
In consent product, that is the new product made for DPDP compliance, a key challenge that we saw was to make the process of data mapping simple. So we had to make sure that the user would not be confused as to what comes next or what goes under what category. So we had to come up with a lot of iterations, and it is where we used prototyping via AI, and then we were able to come up with a very simple solution where the entire process was easily showcased.
UIDI's deadline for moving Aadhaar's biometric devices from L0 to L1 was issued. And it was a very big movement because all of our clients who use biometrics based e signing, they have invested heavily in the L devices. So, for that, we identified what all L1 devices are. We did thorough testing. Whichever device that our clients are choosing, we are ready with that. That movement happened very seamlessly. So, I'm very proud of that.
DLT, which governs sending of SMS notifications to people, had introduced a rule where each URL that we are sending needs to be whitelisted. So we did not have such a capability and we had to work around it. The problem was they had given a timeline of just a month to do this. Otherwise, an SMS without a whitelisted URL would just not be sent. Many such DLT platforms did not have the ability to whitelist a URL because they had not developed it at their end. The DLT platforms which we were in partnership with were saying that they would provide this functionality within a few days when there was just 1 week remaining. There was no functionality provided by them. So at this point, this was a crisis. When in the market, no one knew which particular provider was allowing URLs to be whitelisted. So at this point, I researched and made a list of all DLT platforms in India, contacted them, and figured out that Tata Communication was one of the few platforms that provided DLT. This was, I think, 2 days before whitelisting. Uh, then we created an account with Tata Communication, and within a day, whitelisted all of our URLs. So yeah, our SMS service remained stable.
Basically, we had a spontaneous demo, and when the demo started, I realized that a deployment is going to start, and we might see some behaviors to be a little different. So we had to sort of stall the client and just start asking about their day and how are they, while our team was just making sure that the deployment is clean. So those couple minutes, the small talk, it was very funny, but it basically helped us because the deployment went through.
Again, with the regulatory space, a lot of new requirements keep coming up, and we realize that the market is asking for a very new product, which is basically the assessment module that we have right now. It had to be made quickly because the industry was in the view that is going to be a separate line of product, but then the market feedback was that we want an integrated solution. For this, again, we made sure that the prototyping, the complete development is heavily AI enabled, and AI right into the development as well, so that it happens very quickly. So the first process in an journey for DPDP compliance was this assessment module. So it was important that it gets shipped quickly so that users are able to get started with that journey of compliance.